An 11-year-old boy stood in an automotive engineering lab, surrounded by laughing executives. "You don't understand anything, kid," the VP sneered. But when that engine roared to life, the laughter died, and a dead man's genius proved unstoppable. Noah Carter learned that some failures sound louder than others when the $500 million prototype engine let out a sound like a dying animal, metal grinding against metal, followed by silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. 23 engineers froze in Walsh Automotive's research and development facility, staring at the massive hybrid engine that was supposed to revolutionize the automotive industry and had instead become a monument to expensive disaster. Gregory Walsh, vice president of engineering, stood at the center of it all with his arms crossed and his face the color of a man watching his career burn. This was the third failure in 2 weeks. The board of directors was arriving in 72 hours. Without a working prototype, Walsh Automotive would lose its government contracts, lay off 3,000 workers, and probably declare bankruptcy. Noah shouldn't have been there at all. At 11 years old, he was supposed to be in the waiting area outside the factory floor, doing homework, while his mother finished her shift on the assembly line. But he'd learned the back routes through Walsh Automotive 2 years ago, when his father had still been alive, and Noah had spent afternoons trailing behind him, watching Daniel Carter work magic with engines that nobody else could fix. Now Daniel was gone, killed in an industrial accident when a crane cable snapped, and Noah was alone with a notebook full of his father's designs and a knowledge of engines that he couldn't explain to anyone without sounding like he was making it up. "Someone tell me what went wrong," Walsh demanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We've invested $500 million and 6 years into this project. 6 years. And it still sounds like we're torturing cats when we try to start it." The lead engineer, a man named Patterson with 30 years of experience, stepped forward carefully. "The hybrid system isn't integrating properly. The electric motors and combustion engine are fighting each other instead of working together. We've tried 17 different calibrations and none of them worked," Walsh finished. "Which means you've had 6 years and 17 attempts to solve a problem that apparently doesn't have a solution." Patterson's face flushed. "Sir, with respect, the theoretical models suggest—" "I don't care about theoretical models." Walsh's voice rose to a shout that echoed off the high ceilings. "I care about results. I care about an engine that runs. Because in 72 hours the board is going to ask me why we've burned through $500 million to build something that doesn't work. And the theoretical models suggest isn't going to save any of our jobs." Noah pressed himself against the wall behind a tool cart, trying to stay invisible. He'd come down to the R&D facility because he'd heard his mother talking to other factory workers about the prototype failure. Heard them whispering that Walsh Automotive might shut down, that 3,000 people, including his mother, might lose their jobs. And Noah knew what was wrong with the engine, had known from the moment he'd heard it try to start. The problem wasn't the calibration or the integration software. It was the torque distribution system. The way the electric motors were positioned created opposing forces during the transition between electric and combustion power. His father had written about it in the notebook, had even designed a solution, a buffer system that allowed the torque to flow through a dampening chamber before reaching the drivetrain. Noah had read those pages 100 times, had memorized the diagrams and calculations, had fallen asleep every night with his father's handwriting swimming before his eyes, trying to understand what it all meant. "Maybe," said a voice Noah didn't recognize. One of the younger engineers, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "We should revisit Daniel Carter's original proposals. He had some innovative ideas about torque management that might—" "Daniel Carter," Walsh interrupted, and his voice had gone cold in a way that made Noah's stomach clench. "Spent 6 months wasting this company's time with ideas that didn't work. His innovative designs were impractical, expensive, and based on theories that had no real-world application. We moved on from Carter's approach years ago, and we're not going back to it now." Amy Chen, Noah recognized her name from his mother's stories about the engineering department, pressed on despite Walsh's tone. "But sir, some of his buffer system concepts could address the torque distribution." "Drop it," Walsh said flatly. "Carter's dead. His ideas were useless, and mentioning either of them again is a waste of everyone's time. What we need are solutions, not nostalgia for a mediocre engineer who couldn't deliver results. The words hit Noah like a physical blow. Mediocre. Useless. His father, who'd been the best engineer at Walsh Automotive, who'd solved problems nobody else could see, who'd taught Noah that every engine had a voice, and if you listened carefully enough, you could hear what it needed. Noah's hands clenched into fists. He should stay quiet, should stay hidden, should remember that he was 11 years old and didn't belong in a facility full of adult engineers with degrees and experience and the authority to tell him he was wrong. But his father wasn't mediocre, and his ideas weren't useless. And Noah couldn't stand there listening to Gregory Walsh lie about the man who'd been brilliant and kind and had died trying to make engines that would change the world. The torque distribution is wrong, Noah said. His voice was quieter than he'd intended, but in the cathedral-like silence of the R&D facility, it carried. 23 engineers turned to stare at him. Walsh's face shifted from anger to confusion to rage so fast Noah could track the progression. "Who the hell?" Walsh started. "The torque distribution," Noah repeated, louder now, stepping out from behind the tool cart. "You have the electric motors positioned at 45-degree angles, which creates opposing rotational forces during the transition phase. That's why it sounds like grinding. The forces are canceling each other out instead of combining." Walsh's eyes narrowed. "Security, get this kid out of—" "He's right," Amy Chen said suddenly, staring at Noah with wide eyes. "The motor positioning. We never considered the rotational force vectors during transition. If the forces are opposing—" "He's 11 years old," Walsh interrupted, his face now fully purple with rage. "What is he, one of the factory workers' kids? Did he wander in here from the break room? And you're telling me that you, a trained engineer, are taking mechanical advice from a child?" Amy looked between Noah and Walsh, uncertainty flickering across her face. "I'm just saying. The math, Walsh said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet, is something that children playing in restricted areas don't understand. Just like they don't understand that this facility is off limits. Just like they don't understand that real engineering requires education, experience, and expertise that you don't get from, watching YouTube videos?" Several engineers laughed. Nervous, obligatory laughter from people who knew which direction the power flowed. Noah's face burned. Frank Morrison, the oldest engineer in the room at 61, hadn't laughed. He was staring at Noah with an expression Noah couldn't read. "What's your name, son?" "Noah," he said quietly. "Noah Carter." The room went still again. A different kind of still. Several engineers exchanged glances. Amy Chen's eyes widened. "Carter," Frank repeated. "Daniel Carter's boy?" "Yes, sir." Frank looked at the prototype engine, then back at Noah, and something shifted in his expression. "Your father was the best engineer I ever worked with. If you're half as smart as he was—" "Daniel Carter," Walsh interrupted sharply, "was a dreamer who couldn't execute. And I'm not going to stand here while his son plays pretend engineer in a restricted facility." He turned to Noah, and his smile was cruel. "Let me explain something to you, kid. This engine represents 6 years of work by some of the most educated minds in automotive engineering. People with PhDs, people with decades of experience, people who actually understand the mathematics and physics involved." He gestured at the failed prototype. "And you, an 11-year-old whose only qualification is being related to a dead mediocre engineer, think you can waltz in here and solve a problem that has stumped all of them? You think you understand something they don't?" The other engineers were watching now, no longer laughing. This had gone beyond mockery into something uglier. "I don't think," Noah said, his voice shaking but determined, "that my father was mediocre, and I don't think his designs were useless. I think he was right about the torque distribution, and I think if you'd listened to him instead of—" "Instead of what?" Walsh demanded, stepping closer. "Instead of going with proven engineering principles? Instead of following the advice of people with actual credentials? Your father was a mechanic who got lucky a few times. That doesn't make him a visionary. That makes him a factory worker who got ideas above his station." Noah felt tears threatening. "Don't cry. Don't cry in front of 23 engineers and prove Walsh right about you being just a kid who doesn't understand anything. Tell me something," Walsh continued, and his voice had taken on a theatrical quality now, playing to the audience of engineers. Do you even know what torque distribution means? Can you explain rotational force vectors? Do you understand the mathematics of hybrid power integration? Noah started. Or did you just hear some big words your father used and decided to repeat them? Walsh smiled. Because that's what this sounds like. A child repeating things he doesn't understand, trying to feel important in a world that's too complex for him. He turned to address the room. This is what desperation looks like, people. When a $500 million project is failing, everyone suddenly becomes an expert. Factory workers, children. Probably the janitor has opinions about our torque distribution too. The laughter was louder now, more confident. Noah was the joke, and Walsh had given them permission to laugh. You don't understand anything, kid, Walsh said, his voice final and dismissive. You don't understand engineering. You don't understand this industry. And you definitely don't understand how far out of your depth you are right now. He pointed toward the door. Security will escort you back to the waiting area. And if I catch you in a restricted facility again, your mother will be looking for a new job. Do I make myself clear? Noah couldn't speak, couldn't move. The words, "You don't understand anything," echoed in his head, mixing with the laughter, mixing with Walsh calling his father mediocre and useless, and a factory worker who got ideas above his station. Yes, sir, Noah whispered. He walked toward the door on legs that felt disconnected from his body. Behind him, Walsh was already barking orders at his engineers, dismissing Noah's existence as completely as if he'd never been there. But Frank Morrison caught Noah's arm as he passed. Your father's notebook, Frank said quietly, so only Noah could hear. Do you still have it? Noah nodded, not trusting his voice. The designs for the buffer system, Frank continued. The torque dampening chamber. Did he finish those? Yes, sir, Noah managed. Every detail, calculations, materials, assembly instructions, everything. Frank's grip on Noah's arm tightened slightly. Listen to me very carefully. Walsh is wrong. About your father, about you, about all of it. Daniel Carter was brilliant. And if you're telling me the torque distribution is the problem, he glanced back at the failed prototype, then I believe you. But Mr. Walsh said, Walsh, Frank interrupted gently, is scared. Scared men make stupid decisions. And right now, he's too scared to listen to the truth, even when it's standing right in front of him. He released Noah's arm. Go home, but keep that notebook safe. And trust your father's work. He was right about more than Walsh will ever understand. Noah left Walsh Automotive Engineering through the back corridors he'd learned 2 years ago. When his father was alive and the world made sense and nobody told you that understanding things was above your station. His mother was waiting outside the factory with the other shift workers, tired and worried, and unaware that her son had just been humiliated in front of 23 engineers by a man who thought his father was mediocre. Noah didn't tell her, just climbed into their 15-year-old Honda and pretended to do homework while Sarah drove them home through Detroit streets, lined with closed factories and broken dreams. That night, alone in his room, Noah opened his father's notebook to the page with the torque dampening chamber design. The calculations were elegant. The solution was perfect. His father had known exactly how to fix the problem Walsh's engineers couldn't solve. And Noah knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who'd spent 2 years studying every word his father had written, that the design would work. The question was, would anyone listen to an 11-year-old factory worker's son? Or would Walsh's prototype fail, the company collapse, and 3,000 people lose their jobs because a scared man couldn't admit that a dead engineer had been right all along? Noah traced his father's handwriting with one finger, making a decision that would change everything. If Walsh wouldn't listen, Noah would prove it a different way. He'd fix the engine himself. Sarah Carter had worked the assembly line at Walsh Automotive for 14 years, and she'd learned that some conversations happened best in the car after midnight shifts, when exhaustion made people honest and darkness made secrets easier to share. You've been quiet, she said to Noah as they drove home through empty Detroit streets. Something happened at school? Noah stared out the window at closed storefronts and broken streetlights. He could tell her, could explain that he'd been humiliated by Gregory Walsh in front of 23 engineers, that his father had been called mediocre and useless, that Walsh had threatened her job if Noah stepped foot in the R&D facility again. But his mother already carried enough weight. 2 jobs, the assembly line during the day, inventory management at a warehouse 3 nights a week, raising a son alone, keeping their apartment, paying for his father's funeral on credit cards that would take years to clear. Just tired, Noah said. Long day. Sarah glanced at him, and Noah knew she didn't believe him, but she also didn't push. That was how they survived, giving each other space for the grief and fear they couldn't quite speak aloud. When they got home, Sarah headed straight for the shower. Noah went to his room and opened his father's notebook to the page with the torque-dampening chamber design. The solution was there. Complete, detailed, perfect. His father had even included assembly instructions with specific torque specifications for every bolt. Daniel Carter had known exactly what Walsh's engineers would need, had written it down with the careful precision of someone who understood that the difference between success and failure was often measured in thousandths of an inch. Noah's phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Frank Morrison," the text read. "Got your number from your dad's old employee file. We need to talk. Not on the phone. Can you get to the Bluebird Diner on Woodward tomorrow morning? 7 a.m. before my shift." Noah stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, "I'll be there." He didn't sleep much that night. Kept thinking about Walsh's face, about the laughter, about his father being called a factory worker who got ideas above his station. The Bluebird Diner was the kind of place where automotive workers had been eating breakfast since before Noah was born. Vinyl booths, coffee that came in infinite refills, and eggs cooked exactly how you ordered them. Frank Morrison was already there when Noah arrived, sitting in a back booth with a cup of coffee and the tired eyes of someone who'd been thinking too hard for too long. "Your father used to bring you here," Frank said as Noah slid into the booth. "Saturday mornings. You were what, 7, 8? He'd let you order chocolate chip pancakes and then spend 2 hours drawing engine designs on napkins while he worked through problems." Noah nodded, throat tight. He remembered. Remembered his father's voice explaining how combustion worked, how electricity flowed, how every engine was just a conversation between fuel and air and spark. "I want you to understand something," Frank continued. "What happened yesterday with Walsh, that wasn't about you being wrong. It was about him being scared. The prototype failure has the board ready to shut down the entire hybrid division. 3,000 jobs, and Walsh knows that if this project fails, he fails. His reputation, his career, everything. So he takes it out on an 11-year-old. He takes it out on anyone who reminds him that he's failing," Frank corrected. "Your father embarrassed Walsh 6 years ago, presented designs that were better than anything Walsh's team had developed. Solutions that were elegant and revolutionary, and made Walsh look ordinary by comparison. Then why didn't they use Dad's designs?" Frank's expression hardened. "Because Walsh convinced the board that Daniel's ideas were too experimental, too risky. Said we needed proven engineering approaches, not wild theories from a mechanic who didn't have the credentials to back up his claims." He paused. 3 months later, your father died in that crane accident, and Walsh buried his designs so deep that most people forgot they existed. But you didn't forget. I worked with your father for 15 years, Frank said. I knew he was brilliant. And yesterday, when you described the torque distribution problem, I heard Daniel's voice. The same analysis. The same understanding. You've been studying his notebook, haven't you? Every night for 2 years, Noah admitted. I've memorized most of it. The calculations, the designs, the theories. I know. He stopped, aware of how crazy it sounded. I know it would work. The buffer system. The dampening chamber. Everything. Frank leaned forward. Then we have a problem. Because Walsh is never going to listen to you. Never going to admit that a child has the solution he's been missing for 6 years, even if you're right. Especially if you're right, because that would mean admitting your father was right, and Walsh spent 6 years and $500 million being wrong. So what do I do? You prove it, Frank said simply. You fix the engine when nobody's looking. Make it work so perfectly that Walsh can't deny it. Then we figure out how to get him to pay attention. Noah's heart pounded. You mean sneak into the R&D facility? I mean, I leave a security door unlocked tomorrow night. I mean, the overnight guard, Jimmy, takes his break from midnight to 12:30 and doesn't check the camera feeds during that time. I mean, if someone who knew what they were doing wanted to access that prototype, they'd have a 30-minute window where nobody would see them. That's your job, Noah said. If Walsh finds out you helped me, I'm 61 years old, Frank interrupted. I've got my pension locked in. Walsh can fire me, but he can't take that away. You, though, you're 11. You've got your whole life ahead of you. And you've got your father's genius in your head. That matters more than my job. But if the engine doesn't work, if I'm wrong, you're not wrong, Frank said with absolute certainty. I've seen enough engines in my life to know brilliance when I hear it. Your father was right, and so are you. The only question is whether you're brave enough to prove it. Noah thought about his mother working 2 jobs, about 3,000 families who would lose their income if Walsh Automotive collapsed, about his father's designs gathering dust in some forgotten file while Walsh called him mediocre. I'll do it, Noah said. Frank slid a piece of paper across the table. Blueprints of the R&D facility. The door I'll leave unlocked is here, southeast corner. The prototype is in Bay 3. Security cameras cover the main floor, but there's a blind spot along the east wall if you stay low. Jimmy's break is midnight to 12:30, but give yourself extra buffer time. Be in and out by 12:20. 20 minutes? Noah said. I'd need at least an hour to... Then you come back multiple nights, Frank said. Do what you can in 20-minute windows. But you cannot get caught, Noah. If Walsh finds you in there again, he'll press charges for trespassing. Corporate espionage, maybe. He'll make an example out of you to cover his own failures. The weight of it settled on Noah's shoulders. Not just fixing an engine, risking arrest, risking his mother's job, risking everything on the belief that a dead man's notebook contained answers that $500 million of engineering couldn't find. Why are you helping me? Noah asked. Frank's eyes got distant. Because 28 years ago, I was a junior engineer fresh out of college, and I made a mistake that almost got 3 people killed. Your father caught the error. Didn't humiliate me, didn't report me, just pulled me aside and showed me what I'd done wrong, then helped me fix it before anyone got hurt. He focused back on Noah. He saved my career, maybe my life. I've been looking for a way to repay that debt for almost 3 decades. This isn't repayment. This is just a down payment. Noah left the Bluebird Diner with the blueprints folded in his pocket and a plan forming in his mind. He'd need tools. Would need to study the prototype's physical layout to understand how to access the motor mounts. Would need to figure out how to implement his father's buffer system in 20-minute windows without being caught. That afternoon, while his mother was at her warehouse job, Noah went to the library and pulled up Walsh Automotive's technical specifications database, publicly available for stockholders and potential clients. He found the prototype's dimensions, the motor mount configurations, the torque distribution maps that showed exactly what he'd told Walsh yesterday, opposing forces at 45-degree angles. He made notes in the margins of his father's notebook, cross-referenced the buffer system design with the prototype specifications, calculated material requirements, bolt sizes, assembly sequence. It would take 3 nights, maybe 4. If he could work uninterrupted for 20 minutes each night, he could install the dampening chamber, reposition the motor mounts, calibrate the torque distribution. If he didn't get caught, if his father's designs actually worked, if he didn't destroy a $500 million prototype and end up in juvenile detention. The doubts were easier to push away when he focused on the calculations. Numbers didn't lie. Physics didn't care about age or credentials. His father's math was sound. The solution was real. That evening, Noah's mother came home from the warehouse exhausted and went straight to bed. Noah waited until he heard her soft snoring, then pulled out his father's toolbox from the back of his closet. Daniel Carter had taught Noah how to use every tool by the time he was 8. Not because he expected Noah to become a mechanic, but because he believed that understanding how things worked, really understanding, with your hands and your mind, made you see the world differently. Noah selected what he'd need: metric socket set, torque wrench, wire strippers, electrical tape, his father's favorite Phillips head screwdriver with the worn handle that fit perfectly in Noah's small hands. He packed everything in his school backpack, along with the notebook, the blueprints, and a flashlight. Then he set his alarm for 11:45 p.m. and tried to sleep. He couldn't. Kept thinking about Walsh's face, about those words. You don't understand anything, kid. About his father being called mediocre by a man who was failing at exactly what Daniel had solved years ago. At 11:43, Noah got up. His mother was still asleep. He left a note on his desk, just in case something went wrong, explaining everything. where he was going, why, that it wasn't her fault if he got caught. Then he slipped out through the bedroom window onto the fire escape, the same way he used to sneak out for late-night walks when his father first died and the apartment felt too quiet to breathe. Walsh Automotive loomed in the distance, 3 blocks away, lights still on in some windows where the night shift kept the factory running. Noah approached from the east, staying in shadows, using the routes his father had taught him years ago when Daniel would take him on walks and point out how cities were just puzzles if you knew how to see them. The southeast door was exactly where Frank said it would be. Noah tried the handle, half expecting it to be locked, expecting Frank to have changed his mind or gotten caught or decided this was too risky. The door opened, Noah slipped inside, and the familiar smell of machine oil and metal hit him with the force of memory. This place still smelled like his father, still felt like those Saturday mornings when the world was simple and engines were just problems waiting to be solved. Bay 3 was across the main floor. Noah could see the prototype in the distance, massive, complex, beautiful in its potential. 23 engineers couldn't make it work. His father had known how. Now Noah had 20 minutes to start proving it. He stayed low along the east wall, moving through the blind spot Frank had marked on the blueprints. The security cameras swept their programmed patterns, missing him by feet. When Noah reached the prototype, he set down his backpack and pulled out his father's notebook, opening to the page he'd memorized. The torque-dampening chamber design stared back at him, Daniel Carter's handwriting as familiar as his own. "Okay, Dad," Noah whispered. "Let's see if you were right." He picked up his father's worn Phillips head screwdriver, the one that fit perfectly in his 11-year-old hands, and got to work. 20 minutes wasn't enough time to fix everything, but it was enough time to start, to prove that a dead man's designs could do what $500 million couldn't. And somewhere in that massive facility, Gregory Walsh was probably sleeping soundly, certain that his problem was unsolvable and his humiliation of a factory worker's son was justified. He had no idea that the boy he'd called stupid was about to save everything Walsh had spent 6 years destroying, if Noah didn't get caught first. The first night, Noah managed to remove the outer casing from the motor mount assembly before Jimmy's break ended, and he had to slip back out through the southeast door like a ghost that had never been there. The second night, his hand shook so badly it took him 5 minutes just to position the first bolt of the dampening chamber. By the time he heard footsteps in the distance, someone working late, not Jimmy, Noah had barely installed the mounting bracket before he had to grab his tools and disappear into the shadows along the east wall. The third night, everything went wrong. Noah had made it to Bay 3 without incident, had the prototype's housing panel removed, and was carefully positioning the first component of his father's buffer system when he heard voices. Not Jimmy the security guard on his scheduled break. Different voices, coming closer. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. He was crouched behind the prototype with his father's toolbox open and components spread across the floor. No time to pack up, no time to run. The blind spot along the east wall was 30 feet away. He'd never make it. He did the only thing he could, pressed himself into the shadows beneath the prototype itself, pulling his backpack close, trying to make himself invisible in the darkness under 3 tons of experimental engine. Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. 2 sets. Voices Noah recognized, telling you, the board is going to shut us down. Amy Chen's voice, stressed and tired. Walsh is delusional if he thinks we can fix this in 72 hours. 60 hours now, another voice corrected. Robert Sullivan, the plant manager. And you're right. We can't fix it. Walsh's approach is fundamentally flawed. They stopped near the prototype, close enough that Noah could see their shoes from his hiding spot beneath the motor housing. His heart hammered so loud he was certain they'd hear it. Then why not tell the board? Amy asked. Because Walsh has convinced them that any failure is our failure, not his. Frank Morrison's voice joined the conversation. Noah hadn't realized Frank was there. He's positioned himself as the visionary, and us as the incompetent engineers who can't execute his brilliant plans. Even though they're his plans that are failing, Amy said bitterly. Did you see the latest iteration? The torque distribution is still wrong. We keep making the same mistakes because Walsh won't listen to alternative approaches, like Daniel Carter's designs, Frank said. A pause. Noah, hidden in the shadows along the east wall with his backpack of tools, froze. You really think Carter's old proposals would have worked? Amy's voice was skeptical but curious. I know they would have, Frank said. I watched Daniel solve problems that teams of PhDs couldn't crack. He saw engines differently, understood them on an instinctive level that had nothing to do with credentials and everything to do with genius. Then why did Walsh reject them? Because admitting Daniel was right would have meant admitting Walsh was wrong, Frank said. And Gregory Walsh has never admitted being wrong about anything in his entire career. Noah pressed himself against the prototype, hidden in shadows, holding his breath. He hadn't expected anyone to be in the facility this late. Frank and Amy Chen were standing near the entrance to Bay 3, their voices carrying in the empty space. The board meeting is in 2 days, Amy said. If this prototype doesn't work, Walsh is going to lay off half the engineering department along with the factory workers. He's already preparing his presentation, blaming the failure on insufficient technical expertise in the team, making it sound like we failed him instead of the other way around. That's Walsh, Frank said bitterly. Always someone else's fault. Never his own bad decisions coming home to roost. Noah pressed himself against the prototype's chassis, hidden in shadows. His father's Phillips head screwdriver still in his hand. He'd been working for 18 minutes, had just finished installing the first mounting bracket for the dampening chamber, when he'd heard voices approaching Bay 3. Frank Morrison and Amy Chen. Noah recognized their voices immediately. You're sure about this? Amy was saying. If Walsh finds out you helped Carter's kid, then he fires me, Frank interrupted, and I spend my retirement with a clear conscience instead of wondering what I could have done differently. They were close now. Noah pressed himself against the prototype's housing, trying to be invisible, trying not to breathe too loud. The boy was right, Amy said, about the torque distribution. I ran the calculations after everyone left. The opposing force is at 45 degrees. It's exactly what's causing the failure. How did an 11-year-old see what 23 engineers missed? Because he's Daniel Carter's son. Frank's voice joined the conversation. Noah hadn't realized Frank was there. And Daniel saw engines differently than the rest of us. Saw the poetry in them, not just the mechanics. Noah pressed himself against the prototype, hidden in shadow. He hadn't expected anyone to be in the facility at midnight. The boy was right, Amy Chen's voice. About everything. The torque distribution, the opposing forces. I ran the calculations after Walsh kicked him out. His analysis was perfect. An 11-year-old saw what 23 engineers missed. Because we weren't looking for it, Frank said. We were following Walsh's approach. Daniel's approach was completely different. Revolutionary even. And Walsh buried it because admitting Daniel was right would mean admitting Walsh was wrong, Amy finished. For 6 years. For $500 million. Noah froze behind the prototype, his father's screwdriver still in his hand. They were here, Frank and Amy, in the facility at nearly midnight. He could hear them but couldn't see them. They were somewhere near the entrance to Bay 3. The boy was right yesterday, Amy continued. The torque distribution analysis was spot on. I ran the calculations after Walsh threw him out. The 45-degree motor positioning creates exactly the kind of opposing forces he described. Daniel was right 6 years ago, Frank said. And Walsh buried it because admitting a mechanic without a PhD had better ideas than his entire engineering team would have destroyed his reputation. Noah pressed himself against the prototype, heart pounding. He'd been working for 18 minutes, had the motor housing partially disassembled, the dampening chamber components laid out on his father's blueprint diagrams. 2 more minutes and he'd have been gone, back out through the southeast door before Jimmy returned from break. But Frank and Amy were here, in Bay 3, talking about his father. The boy was right yesterday, Amy Chen's voice carried across the facility. The torque distribution analysis was perfect. I ran the numbers after everyone left. The 45-degree motor placement creates exactly the opposing forces he described. Of course he was right, Frank replied. Daniel Carter's son. That boy has his father's mind. Then why didn't Walsh listen? Because listening would mean admitting he was wrong 6 years ago, that he rejected designs that would have saved this project, that he let a brilliant engineer die thinking his work was worthless. Noah pressed himself against the prototype, heart pounding. They were early. Jimmy's break wasn't supposed to end for another 8 minutes, but voices echoed across the R&D facility. Frank's familiar gravel tone, and a woman's voice Noah recognized as Amy Chen. "We can't just let Walsh destroy this company," Amy was saying. 3,000 families depend on these jobs. "Then we need proof," Frank replied. "Solid, undeniable proof that Daniel Carter's designs would have worked, that Walsh killed this project 6 years ago out of ego and fear." They were walking closer. Noah pressed himself against the prototype, trying to become invisible behind the massive engine block. His backpack was open, tools scattered, his father's notebook lying on the concrete floor where anyone could see it. "The boy," Amy said. "Noah. He was right yesterday, wasn't he? About the torque distribution. Daniel's son inherited more than his father's eyes." Frank's voice joined the conversation. Noah hadn't known he was there. "The kid sees engines the way Daniel did, like they're puzzles that want to be solved rather than problems to be defeated." Noah froze behind the prototype, his heart hammering. It was 12:17 a.m. He'd been working for 17 minutes, had just finished removing the first motor mount, and now there were voices. Multiple voices. People who weren't supposed to be here during Jimmy's break. "I pulled the original proposals," Amy Chen said, and Noah could hear papers rustling. "From 6 years ago. Daniel Carter's designs for the torque dampening system. Walsh rejected them, but Amy, these are brilliant. Revolutionary. If we implemented even half of what Carter suggested, Walsh will never approve it," Frank Morrison's voice. "His ego won't allow it. Admitting that Daniel was right means admitting Walsh wasted 6 years and $500 million being wrong." Noah pressed himself against the prototype, hidden in shadow, barely breathing. They were in Bay 3, right here, maybe 20 feet away. If they turned on the main lights instead of using flashlights, they'd see him immediately. "Then we don't ask Walsh," Amy said. "We implement it ourselves. Show him results instead of asking permission. The board arrives in..." She checked something. 58 hours. "If we can get this engine running by then." "With what team?" Frank interrupted. "Walsh has everyone working on his failed calibration approach. Anyone who suggests Daniel's designs gets shut down. You saw what he did to that kid yesterday." Silence, heavy and uncomfortable. "That was cruel," Amy said finally. "Daniel's son, right? The boy looked like he'd been studying those designs. Knew exactly what was wrong with the torque distribution." "Because he has," Frank said. "I met with him this morning. Noah's been memorizing his father's notebook for 2 years. Every calculation, every design, every theory. That kid understands hybrid systems better than half our engineering team." "He's 11 years old," Amy said, but there was no mockery in her voice, just wonder. "So was Mozart when he started composing symphonies," Frank replied. "Age doesn't determine genius. Daniel saw this problem 6 years ago." Walsh ignored him. Now Daniel's son sees the same solution, and Walsh humiliates him. How many times does the Carter family have to be right before someone listens? Noah's heart pounded so loud, he was certain they'd hear it. Frank believed in him. Amy believed in his father's designs. They were trying to help, trying to fix Walsh's mistakes before the deadline destroyed everything. But they didn't know Noah was already here, already working. Already proving that his father's designs could save the company Walsh was determined to ruin through pride. "I can't be part of unauthorized modifications," Amy said reluctantly. "If Walsh finds out, I lose my job, and I have student loans that..." "I know," Frank said gently. "I'm not asking you to risk your career. Just, if you happen to leave Daniel's original proposals where someone could find them, someone who knew what to do with them, that's not unauthorized modification. That's just misplaced paperwork." Amy laughed quietly. "You're asking me to help a 11-year-old break into this facility and modify a $500 million prototype?" "I'm asking you to leave papers on a desk," Frank corrected. "What happens after that is beyond our control." More silence. Noah held his breath. "Desk in Bay 3, Amy said finally. "I'll leave them there before I clock out tonight. If someone finds them, that's not my responsibility." "You're a good person, Amy Chen." "I'm a person who watched a brilliant engineer get called mediocre yesterday," Amy corrected, "and who watched his son get humiliated for being right. That's not the kind of engineer I want to be, not the kind of company I want to work for." Their footsteps moved away, voices fading as they headed toward the exit. Noah waited until he heard the door close, then counted to 60 before moving. On the desk nearby, the one Amy had mentioned, sat a folder. Noah opened it with shaking hands. Daniel Carter's original proposals. Every page his father had submitted 6 years ago. The designs Walsh had rejected. The solutions that could have prevented 6 years of failure and $500 million of waste. Noah spread the papers out next to his father's notebook. They matched perfectly. Every calculation, every specification, every elegant solution to problems Walsh's team still couldn't solve. His father had been right, had been brilliant, had seen the future of automotive engineering and been dismissed by a man too scared to admit someone else was smarter. Noah checked his watch. 12:17. 3 minutes until he needed to leave. Not enough time to finish the dampening chamber installation, but enough to make significant progress. He worked with the focused intensity his father had taught him. No wasted motion, every action purposeful. The motor mount repositioning was delicate work, requiring precise torque specifications that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. His father's Phillips head screwdriver fit perfectly in his hands, turned bolts with the exact pressure needed. This tool had built engines that changed lives. Now it was building an engine that would save 3,000 jobs and prove that Daniel Carter's genius hadn't died with him. At 12:19, Noah packed his tools, carefully returned the proposals to their folder, and slipped back through the blind spot toward the southeast door. He was 3 feet from exit when the lights blazed on. Noah froze, his heart stopping. Gregory Walsh stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face purple with rage. Behind him, a security guard Noah didn't recognize. Not Jimmy. Someone else. Someone who apparently didn't take midnight breaks. "You," Walsh said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You actually came back. After I specifically told you that trespassing again would cost your mother her job." Noah couldn't speak, couldn't move. The toolkit in his backpack suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "Corporate espionage," Walsh continued, stepping forward. "Breaking and entering, tampering with company property, destroying a $500 million prototype." His smile was cruel. "I'm not just firing your mother, kid. I'm having you arrested. You and whatever adult helped you do this. Because there's no way an 11-year-old planned this alone." "Nobody helped me," Noah managed. "I did this myself." "Liar," Walsh spat. "Someone gave you access. Someone left that door unlocked. And when I find out who—" He pulled out his phone. "They're finished. Security, this is Walsh. I need police at the R&D facility immediately. I'm detaining a juvenile trespasser who's been sabotaging our prototype." Noah's world narrowed to a single point of terror. Police. Arrested. His mother losing her job. Frank being fired. Amy being fired. All because Noah thought he could fix what Walsh had broken. "Wait," said a voice from behind Walsh. Frank Morrison stepped into view, his face calm despite the situation. "Before you call the police, you might want to start that engine." Walsh turned. "What?" "The prototype," Frank said. "Start it. See what the kid did before you have him arrested for sabotage." "I know what he did," Walsh snarled. "He destroyed 6 years of—" "Start the engine," Frank repeated, his voice hard now. "Unless you're afraid of what you'll hear." Walsh stared at Frank for a long moment, rage and suspicion warring on his face. Then he gestured to the security guard. "Fine. Let's document exactly what this little criminal destroyed before the police arrive." They walked to Bay 3, Walsh's hand tight on Noah's shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. The prototype loomed under harsh fluorescent lights, looking exactly as it had when Walsh's team had given up on it. Walsh climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key with the confidence of someone certain he was about to prove an 11-year-old wrong. The engine started, not with the dying animal sound of previous attempts, not with grinding metal or electrical failure or any of the problems that had plagued it for 6 years. It started smooth, perfect, like engines were supposed to sound when brilliant minds designed them and careful hands built them right. The silence in Bay 3 was absolute. Walsh turned the key off. On again. The engine purred. Off. On. Perfect every time. He climbed out of the driver's seat slowly, staring at the prototype like it had betrayed him. That's not possible. We've tried everything. Every calibration. Every approach except Daniel Carter's, Frank said quietly. The one you rejected 6 years ago. The one you called impractical and expensive and theoretical. The one his 11-year-old son just implemented in 20-minute windows over 3 nights because you were too proud to admit you were wrong. Walsh's face went from purple to white. You helped him. You're fired. You and anyone else involved in this unauthorized. Call the board, Amy Chen said, stepping into Bay 3 from wherever she'd been hiding. Right now. Tell them the prototype works. Tell them Daniel Carter's designs, the ones you buried 6 years ago, just saved the entire hybrid division. Then explain to them why you're firing the people who saved your project instead of thanking them. Walsh looked between Frank, Amy, and Noah, trapped, cornered, watching his career collapse not because the engine failed, but because it succeeded. And Noah stood there, his father's toolkit on his back, watching a dead man's genius prove unstoppable after all. The board of directors arrived at Walsh Automotive at exactly 9 a.m., and Gregory Walsh was already sweating. 12 executives in expensive suits filed into the conference room overlooking the factory floor, their faces showing the particular kind of displeasure that came from investing $500 million into something that might not exist. The prototype sat in Bay 3 below them, visible through the glass walls, a monument to either revolutionary engineering or catastrophic failure, depending on what happened in the next hour. Noah wasn't supposed to be there. After Walsh had caught him in the facility 3 nights ago, he'd been banned from company property pending potential criminal charges. But Frank Morrison had other ideas. And at 8:55 a.m., he'd smuggled Noah into the observation deck above the conference room, where visitors could watch board meetings through one-way glass. Stay quiet, Frank had whispered. No matter what happens, you need to hear this. Below them, Walsh stood at the head of the conference table, his presentation ready, his confidence rebuilt after 72 hours of desperate rehearsal. He'd spent 3 days trying to figure out how an 11-year-old had fixed what his team couldn't, eventually deciding that the answer didn't matter. What mattered was controlling the narrative before the board decided to shut down the entire hybrid division. Gentlemen, Walsh began, clicking to his first slide, I know the past 6 years have been challenging. We've faced setbacks that would have destroyed lesser companies, but I'm pleased to report that our persistence has finally paid off. The prototype is functional. The hybrid system is operational. Walsh Automotive is about to revolutionize the automotive industry. Robert Sullivan, the plant manager, sat to Walsh's left with a folder in front of him that he hadn't opened yet. His face was carefully neutral. Show us, said Catherine Morrison, the board chairwoman and Frank's younger sister. Start the engine. Walsh smiled. He'd been waiting for this moment. Absolutely. But first, I want to walk you through the breakthrough that made this possible. The innovative approach to torque management that my team finally perfected after years of— Start the engine, Catherine repeated, her voice leaving no room for preamble. We've been listening to presentations for 6 years, Gregory. Show us results. Walsh's smile tightened, but he gestured to Patterson, the lead engineer, who went down to Bay 3 and climbed into the prototype. Through the glass walls, they watched him turn the key. The engine started perfectly. Smooth, powerful, exactly as a revolutionary hybrid should sound. Several board members leaned forward, surprised. One actually smiled. Walsh's shoulders relaxed slightly. As you can see, our persistence has— How? Catherine interrupted. Be specific. What changed between the failure 3 days ago and success today? Walsh had prepared for this question, had his answer ready. A refinement in the torque distribution calibration. My team implemented a buffer system that allows the electric motors and combustion engine to work in harmony rather than opposition. It's a technique I've been developing for years and— Liar. Every head turned. Frank Morrison stood up from his seat near the back of the conference room, his 61 years of experience giving him the kind of authority that made even board members pay attention. Sit down, Morrison, Walsh said, his voice dangerous. This is a board meeting, not an engineering review. Then let's make it both, Frank said, walking toward the front of the room. He pulled a folder from under his arm, thick, worn, clearly old. Because I have some documents I think the board should see before they congratulate Mr. Walsh on his revolutionary breakthrough. Catherine looked at Walsh, then at Frank. I'll allow it. Mr. Morrison has 40 years with this company. If he has concerns, I want to hear them. Walsh's face went pale. This is highly irregular. So is corporate fraud, Frank interrupted. He opened the folder, pulled out papers that Noah recognized even from the observation deck above. His father's original proposals, the designs Walsh had rejected 6 years ago. These are proposals submitted by Daniel Carter in 2019. 6 years ago, before we'd spent $500 million, before 3,000 jobs were at risk, before we'd wasted 6 years building something that didn't work. He spread the papers across the conference table. Board members leaned in, studying them. Daniel Carter, Frank continued, was one of the most brilliant automotive engineers this company has ever employed. He saw the torque distribution problem before we'd even built the first prototype. Designed a buffer system, a dampening chamber that would allow the electric motors and combustion engine to transition smoothly. Revolutionary, elegant, perfect, and rejected, Catherine said, reading the stamped denial across the top page. By Mr. Walsh. Why? Walsh stood frozen at the head of the table, watching his career disintegrate in real time. Those designs were theoretical, unproven. We needed practical solutions, not experimental. The prototype running in Bay 3 right now, Frank interrupted, uses Daniel Carter's buffer system, his dampening chamber, his torque distribution configuration, every element that Walsh just claimed as his own innovative breakthrough. It's Daniel's work from 6 years ago. Work that Walsh rejected and buried because admitting a mechanic without a PhD had better ideas than his engineering team would have damaged his reputation. Silence fell across the conference room, heavy and damning. That's absurd, Walsh said, but his voice had lost its confidence. The current prototype uses completely different calibration approaches than anything Carter proposed. The similarities are coincidental at best. Robert Sullivan finally opened his folder. Actually, they're identical. He pulled out comparison documents, Daniel's original specifications on one side, the prototype's current configuration on the other. I had these independently verified by Dr. Helen Martinez at MIT. She confirmed that every major system in the working prototype matches Daniel Carter's 2019 proposals with 98.3% accuracy. Walsh grabbed the documents, staring at them as if he could change what they said through force of will. Someone must have accessed Carter's old files, copied them. This is corporate espionage, not... Daniel Carter died 2 years ago, Catherine said quietly. So who accessed his files? Who implemented his designs? The question hung in the air like smoke. Frank looked up at the observation deck, directly at where Noah was hidden behind the one-way glass. Noah's heart stopped. Frank couldn't see him, couldn't know for certain he was there, but somehow he knew anyway. Daniel Carter's son, Frank said. Noah, 11 years old. He's been studying his father's notebook for 2 years. Memorized every design, every calculation, every theory. And 3 nights ago, when Mr. Walsh humiliated him in front of our entire engineering team, called his father mediocre and useless, threatened his mother's job, Frank's voice got harder. That 11-year-old boy snuck into this facility after hours and implemented the designs his father had been too dead to defend. The silence was absolute now. Board members stared at Walsh with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. A child, Catherine said slowly. You're telling me an 11-year-old fixed a $500 million prototype that defeated your entire engineering department? Daniel Carter's son, Frank corrected. Brilliant father, brilliant son. The boy saw the problem immediately, explained it perfectly, and Walsh called him stupid, kicked him out, and threatened his mother's job if he came back. Walsh's hands were shaking. That boy committed corporate trespassing, broke into a restricted facility, tampered with company property worth... He saved this company. Amy Chen's voice cut through the room. She'd been sitting quietly in the corner, but now she stood, pulling out her own documentation. I have 3 years of engineering reports showing that multiple team members, including myself, suggested revisiting Daniel Carter's approaches. Every single suggestion was denied by Mr. Walsh. Every reference to Carter's work was shut down. And when Daniel's son showed up with the exact solution we needed, Walsh humiliated him instead of listening. She walked to the table, adding her papers to the growing pile of evidence. Mr. Walsh didn't just reject good engineering. He actively buried it to protect his ego, Then he tried to take credit for work done by a dead engineer whose designs he'd spent 6 years calling worthless. Walsh looked around the room desperately, searching for allies and finding none. His engineers, his board, even the plant manager. Everyone was staring at him with varying degrees of condemnation. The boy broke the law. Walsh tried again, grasping at straws. Criminal trespassing. Corporate espionage. We need to press charges, not reward. Against an 11-year-old who saved 3,000 jobs? Catherine's voice could have frozen water. While simultaneously exposing that our VP of Engineering has spent 6 years and $500 million ignoring solutions that were handed to him on a silver platter? She stood up. Mr. Walsh, you're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation into your management decisions. Mr. Sullivan will serve as interim VP of Engineering. And someone, she looked at Frank, please bring Daniel Carter's son down here. I'd like to meet the child who apparently understands hybrid systems better than our entire executive team. Walsh opened his mouth to protest, but Catherine's expression stopped him cold. Security guards were already moving toward him, ready to escort him out if necessary. Frank left the conference room and returned 3 minutes later with Noah, who looked terrified and small in a room full of adults deciding his fate. Catherine Morrison studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You're Noah Carter? Yes, ma'am, Noah whispered. And you implemented your father's designs without authorization, after being explicitly banned from this facility, knowing you could be arrested for corporate trespassing? Noah's throat was dry. Yes, ma'am. Why? The question hung in the air. Noah could give a dozen answers. Could talk about proving his father wasn't mediocre. Could mention the 3,000 jobs at risk. Could explain that he'd spent 2 years memorizing his father's notebook and couldn't stand watching Walsh waste everything Daniel had worked for. But what came out was simpler. Because my dad was right, and nobody was listening. Catherine's expression softened slightly. She looked at the paper spread across the conference table, Daniel Carter's brilliant designs that Walsh had rejected and buried. Then back at Noah, who'd risked everything to prove a dead man's genius. Mr. Morrison, Catherine said to Frank, I'm authorizing a full review of Daniel Carter's engineering contributions to this company. Every proposal he submitted, every design he created, every innovation he suggested. I want to know exactly how much intellectual property we've been sitting on while Mr. Walsh chased his ego. She turned to Noah. And you, young man, present a unique problem. You committed corporate trespassing, which normally would result in prosecution. However, she glanced at Walsh, given that you were implementing designs that should have been implemented 6 years ago, and that your actions saved this company from bankruptcy, I'm inclined to view this as unauthorized but valuable consultation. You can't seriously be... Walsh started. You're dismissed, Mr. Walsh, Catherine interrupted coldly. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal items. Your company access will be revoked within the hour. Don't come back. Walsh looked around the room one last time, searching for support and finding only contempt. Then security escorted him out, and Noah watched the man who'd called his father mediocre disappear through the conference room doors. Catherine turned back to Noah. Your father's work saved this company. You ensured that work didn't die with him. That takes courage most adults don't possess. She paused. How would you like a job? Noah blinked. I'm 11. I'm aware, Catherine said dryly, which is why I can't officially hire you. But Walsh Automotive owes the Carter family a debt we can never fully repay. So here's what I'm proposing. A full engineering scholarship, tuition, books, everything, when you're ready for college. And until then, a paid internship program where you work with our R&D team every summer, learning from the best engineers we have, assuming your mother approves. My mother, Noah's voice cracked. She doesn't know I've been sneaking out, doesn't know about any of this. Then we should probably tell her, Catherine said gently, before she finds out her son has been breaking into automotive facilities to save the family honor. Frank stepped forward. I'll call Sarah. Explain everything. She deserves to hear the truth from someone who knew Daniel. As the board meeting dissolved into logistics discussions, Noah stood in the conference room where decisions worth billions of dollars were made, holding his father's worn notebook, and felt the weight of 2 years of grief finally start to lift. His father wasn't mediocre, wasn't useless, wasn't a factory worker who got ideas above his station. Daniel Carter was brilliant, revolutionary. A man whose genius had survived his death because his son refused to let it be buried by someone too scared to admit being wrong. And Gregory Walsh, the man who'd spent 6 years claiming superiority over a mechanic without credentials, had just been fired for the crime of ignoring genius when it was standing right in front of him. Noah traced his finger over his father's handwriting one more time, feeling the connection across death that mathematics and engines and carefully documented wisdom could create. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. "We showed them. And somewhere in the universe, where dead engineers watched their children prove that knowledge was power and truth was unstoppable, Daniel Carter smiled." Sarah Carter was folding laundry when Frank Morrison knocked on her apartment door at 10 a.m. with news that would change everything. "Your son," Frank said gently, "saved 3,000 jobs last night, including yours. And I think you need to hear the whole story." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her hands over her mouth, listening to Frank explain how Noah had spent 3 nights sneaking into Walsh Automotive to implement his father's designs, how an 11-year-old had fixed what $500 million couldn't, how Gregory Walsh had been fired and her son offered a full engineering scholarship. "He could have been arrested," Sarah whispered. He could have let his father's genius die with him," Frank interrupted. "Could have stayed quiet while Walsh destroyed this company out of pride. Instead, he proved that Daniel Carter was right. That brilliance doesn't need permission. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust what you know, even when everyone tells you you're wrong." Sarah looked at Noah, who'd been silent through Frank's explanation, waiting for her reaction. "You risked everything. Your future, my job, our family. I risked everything to save it," Noah said quietly. "Dad's designs were perfect, Mom. Walsh buried them because admitting Dad was smarter would have hurt his pride. I couldn't let that stand. Not when 3,000 families needed those designs to work." Sarah pulled him into her arms, holding him the way she had when Daniel died, and the world stopped making sense. "Your father would be so proud, so incredibly proud." "He'd be proud of both of us," Noah said. "You worked 2 jobs so I could study Dad's notebooks. Kept us together when everything fell apart. This wasn't just me, Mom. It was all 3 of us." Frank cleared his throat. "The board wants to honor Daniel publicly, name the hybrid division after him, the Carter Hybrid Initiative. They're also offering Sarah a position in plant management, better pay, regular hours, benefits, if she wants it." Sarah looked at Frank in shock. "I'm an assembly line worker." "You're the woman who raised Daniel Carter's son while working yourself to exhaustion," Frank corrected. "That takes management skills most executives don't have. The offer is real if you want it." "I want it," Sarah whispered. 3 weeks later, Noah stood at the dedication ceremony for the Carter Hybrid Initiative, watching his father's name being unveiled on the building where Daniel had worked for 15 years. 500 employees attended. The local news covered it. The mayor spoke about innovation and perseverance and the importance of recognizing genius regardless of credentials. But the moment that mattered most came after the ceremony, when Amy Chen approached Noah with a young girl about his age. "This is my niece, Lisa," Amy said. "She's been teaching herself robotics from YouTube videos. Her school counselor says she should focus on realistic goals instead of engineering." Amy smiled. "I told her about a boy who taught himself hybrid systems from his father's notebook, who fixed what professional engineers couldn't, who proved that knowledge matters more than permission." Lisa looked at Noah with hope in her eyes. "Did you really do it? Fix the prototype by yourself?" "Not by myself," Noah said, thinking of his father's careful handwriting, Frank's quiet support, Amy's courage, his mother's sacrifice. "Nobody does anything completely alone. But yeah, I trusted what I knew was true, even when powerful people said I was wrong. You can do that too, even if I'm just a kid. Especially if you're just a kid," Noah said. "Because kids ask why not when adults say impossible. That's not a weakness. That's a superpower." That evening, Noah sat in his room with his father's notebook open to the last page Daniel had written before he died. A single sentence in his father's handwriting. "The best engines run on knowledge, courage, and the refusal to accept that good enough is ever truly enough." Noah picked up a pen and wrote beneath his father's words, "You were right, Dad. About everything. Thank you for teaching me that understanding something matters more than being allowed to understand it. I'll spend my life proving that genius doesn't need credentials, just courage and truth." He closed the notebook carefully, setting it on his desk beside the acceptance letter from MIT's early admission engineering program and the framed photo of his father in his Walsh automotive uniform, smiling at the camera like someone who knew engines were just the beginning of what he could teach his son. The Phillips head screwdriver, worn handle, perfect fit, sat beside the photo. A reminder that the tools that built engines could also build legacies. And somewhere in Detroit, 3,000 families went to work at Walsh Automotive, their jobs secure because a dead engineer had been brilliant and his 11-year-old son had been brave enough to prove it. Gregory Walsh's name was erased from company history within a month. Daniel Carter's name would be remembered forever. Because in the end, truth won, genius prevailed, and a boy who'd been told he didn't understand anything had shown the world exactly how much one person could understand when they refused to stop learning.